We're really excited about being here, and we just love Muskingum. I love coming back on campus. We live in Zanesville, but I do get back occasionally, and we're working on some internship programs here. But every time I'm back at Muskingum, I feel like I'm coming back home again. And I'm sure you guys all feel that same way. It's so fun to be in a room of people who've had that same experience. And Greg and I had a wonderful experience here at Muskingum. We were both, Greg graduated in '81, I graduated in '80. We both lived in Moore Hall. Some of you guys might have lived in Moore Hall. And we'd like to just tell you a little bit about the story of our company. And you'll probably hear some of the mistakes we made, and you'll probably say, boy, those guys were dumb. They went to Muskingum. So I'd like to kind of hit the story a little bit. Then Greg's going to have some remarks, and then I'll conclude with a few remarks that way. But the whole theme is we believe that liberal arts educations are the best possible curriculum for entrepreneurship, and consequently the best possible curriculum to get our country back on track. So with that, I'm going to start telling a little bit. I'm actually going to use a little timeline here. A lot of people think that we started the company. Come on in, welcome. Thank you. We'll give you the podium in a second. A couple of seats there. A couple of seats in the back. Make yourself comfortable.
Excuse me.
Yeah, there's a chair up front here.
Sorry.
So a lot of people think that we started the company right after Muskingum, after we graduated. Actually, we started it while we were still in Muskingum. After my junior year and Greg's sophomore year, we said, well, we want to get some kind of different summer job, not the typical summer job. So somehow we landed a contract with the Blue Drummer restaurants that were here in the local area. They had like 23 restaurants in southeastern Ohio. Anybody remember those, the Blue Drummer restaurants? They were sprinkled around southeastern Ohio. We were painting lines on the parking lots at Blue Drummer restaurants. And we had an old beat up pickup truck and a compressor. And we would paint. We found ourselves painting lines at night, because you couldn't do that during the day. We would camp during the day and then travel to the next one the next day. That took about half the summer, and then we came back here to Muskingum, and we heard that the grounds crew was supposed to paint the light towers that summer, but for some reason they weren't able to do that or didn't want to do that. And so we proposed to the grounds guy that we would paint each tower for $150 each. We didn't even climb to the top of them. They took us up on the deal right away, and we figured that was probably a clue to know we underbid that. It took us 6.5 days to paint the first light tower, and there were 9 of them there. And we did the math, and we said, oh, we're not even going to be done until Thanksgiving at this rate. So we were just about ready to kind of throw in the towel and tell them we couldn't do it. And I was learning how to mountain climb and rappel and all that at the time, so we got out our mountain climbing gear and the ropes and the gears and figured out a way to paint those towers. And by the first one, we figured we made $1.25 per hour. By the last one, we did it in 9.5 hours, and so we made $6.25 per hour. So we went back to college, we got that done, went back to college. It was my senior year, Greg's junior year, and I decided to apply for all the big name Ivy League MBA programs, and applied at 6 or 7 Ivy League schools. And my belief was that if I got accepted, then I would go to that, and if I didn't, then we would continue our business. And as you know, we continued our business. So we graduated, I graduated, and at that time Muskingum was really big in the data processing area. And they had a big data processing center here, and they were one of the few places in the area that did that. And they did data processing for the hospitals and a lot of businesses around the area. And they openly said this wasn't really their focus, and it wasn't their mission. So we didn't feel too bad when we said, maybe we could try to do that and make it our mission. And think, if we made it our mission, think we could rule the world in data processing. So after I graduated, we went out and we bought a computer. And in 1980, you didn't just go online and order a computer. We had to actually search to find a computer. We found one that was about the size of a refrigerator. And it had 32 KB of memory, which is actually about the same amount of memory as those musical greeting cards that you get. and we figured out how to program it. By the time we figured that out, Greg was going back to college. So I was the lone worker there, and I knew nothing about sales, but I made it my goal to call all the businesses in the Cambridge Yellow Pages to see if they would want to subscribe to our service. I couldn't call Zanesville because that was long distance. So some of you younger people don't even know what long distance is. So it came around Christmas time and we had no business. We had nothing. And we had this giant loan, this giant computer. It was operating in the living room of my apartment. And no business, and I think about $11.52 in the checking book. Now, back then, did you guys know that for $2, you could buy one of those giant drums of peanut butter and 2 loaves of bread for $2? Do you realize how long a person can sustain themselves? We sustained ourselves for a while, and by February, we got this brilliant idea that we were going to write letters to all the garbage haulers in the area. They had bills that they needed sent out and so forth. And one of them called us in the next day, and we went in there, and we acted like we had done garbage hauling billing for years. And they kind of surprised us because they took us up on the deal right away. So we were driving home, and we were getting about halfway home, and we were all excited and high-fiving each other. This is our first contract, and then we got about halfway home, and we said, ooh, we've got to write all this software to do this, and we've got to enter in 3,000 names and addresses, and they wanted the bills sent out in a week. And so we drank a lot of coffee that week, but we were pretty excited to finally get some business. Now, some of you are saying, oh no, he's going to go month by month from 1980 to 2016.
Is this where we thank Debbie?
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie, for the edits. Now, I wanted to share that with you, and that's where I get to the timeline, because the first 6 years, I'll put garbage hauler here, the first 6 years, all the advice that we had gotten from everybody was that in order to be successful in business, especially the software business, you have to specialize in something. So we decided we were going to be specialists in the garbage hauling billing business. Well, for the next 6 years, I think we only landed 2 or 3 more garbage haulers. And we tried all kinds of things. Physicians, we got a few physicians to do their billing. We had some fast food stores that we did their payroll. We did some mailing lists. But we could never quite get the traction going. And every time we would go into a new prospect and we do our little pitch, 9 times out of 10 they'd say, we really like you guys and everything, but I don't think we're going to use you because you're not really a specialist in our business. And that's understandable. So we developed this little brochure, and it was a little fold-open kind of thing, and it said specialists in, and then it had a big hole. We'd slide a piece of paper in there as to what we were specializing in. And yeah, that didn't get us too far. But those first years, the first 6 years actually, we called the peanut butter and jelly years because we hadn't figured out a specialty. In 1986, somehow we landed a contract with a local nursing home, Zandex Healthcare, which is in Zanesville. And they had a big problem with the medical supplies, the gauze pads and the syringes and so forth that they use with the patients. They actually needed to track all those, and actually they could bill for them. So we developed a little barcode system. Remember, barcoding was just becoming kind of popular at that time. And it used a little barcode reader. It looked like a big magic marker. It was portable, and they could scan the barcodes of it. At the end of the day, plug it into a little data well, and it would do all their billing and inventory control. And they liked it. And so they started sharing that with some other people, and next thing you know, pretty soon we had other nursing homes contacting us and more nursing homes. And by 1990, this was when the barcoding thing came, by 1990, we had about 400 nursing homes using this product. And I think we had about 12 employees at that time. Now, if you can imagine, if this was our line of revenue, okay, moving along, how do you think the revenue was going for the first 6 years? It was pretty flat. It kind of went like a straight line like that. But at this point, what do you think started happening? It started moving up a little bit. By 1990 then, we started a big chain, a couple chains, one called Manor Care came on board. I think they were the second or third largest nursing home chain in the country. Another company called HCR, which is out of Toledo. And by 1995, we had about 1,500 nursing homes, and I think we had about 22 employees at that time. And this line kept kind of going up like that, and things looked pretty promising. And we had software people on staff, and customer service people, and sales people, and it was pretty exciting. Well, in 1997, a big event happened in the nursing home industry that was actually called PPS. Probably not something you've heard that acronym, but it had to do with Medicare fraud. And the nursing homes, the legislation was changed overnight, that the way nursing home payments were is instead of based on the costs that the nursing homes experienced, it was based on how ill the patients were. So suddenly, 30% of the nursing homes went into bankruptcy, which meant 30% of our customers were in bankruptcy. And they didn't have a desire to track the costs of the supplies that they were using. Does anybody have any idea maybe what our revenue did at that time? It started to plummet down. In fact, we dropped down about 50%. And things got a little disconcerting at that time. And we continued to convince and believe our own rhetoric that those nursing homes, they should still want to have that barcoding system. They should still want to track that cost. We actually believed ourselves. Well, at some point, we started listening to our customers again. And some of the customers said, we need a way to track the care, how ill the patients are. So we developed, through the help of one of our customers, a touchscreen device that would be mounted on the walls, and the nurse aides, as they cared for the residents in the nursing homes, they could go up to the touchscreen and document what it was that they had done for that resident and what they observed about the resident, which was really the key component to reimbursement in nursing homes. So we developed that, and that product kind of got launched. It was called Care Tracker. It got launched in 2000. And very, very quickly, we started bringing on a number of nursing homes. And then somewhere in about 2004, the largest nursing home chain in the country purchased it. And that validated what we were doing. And this line started continuing, and so the second largest, and the third largest, and a number of nursing homes, and this line just continued right up to grow even much more significantly than here. And by 2011, I think we had about a third, about 30% of all nursing homes in the country were using Care Tracker, which was pretty exciting. And we had about 92 employees, and they were all here in New Concord, downtown. In fact, some of you, as you drive today from the campus and go out to I-70, right as you exit town, on the left is a big building, and it says Cerner. Okay. That's our building, that's our company. It was called Resource Systems when we owned it, and then we sold it in 2011 to Cerner Corporation, which is a large public company who has specialty in hospital software. And so they were very interested in buying us for the nursing home software that we had. And So I stayed around for a year. Greg exited pretty soon, and I participated in kind of big company world for a year, and then exited from there and have been involved in entrepreneurship development at the Muskingum County Business Incubator. So that's a little bit of a story, but I'm going to quiz you a little bit. 2 quiz questions. You're all brilliant Muskingum people. What were we doing wrong? What did we learn, do you suppose? What were we doing wrong, kind of up until this inflection point? Yes?
Trying to earn the most money you could get wherever you could get it from.
Exactly. We weren't specializing. We weren't specializing in anything, so consequently, we weren't really valuable to anybody. We were trying to be everything to everybody, and we were really not anything to anybody. It was a really, really important lesson that we learned, and that kind of stuck with us for the rest of our corporate life, and every decision we made usually was mapped against that. Is this in our core competency? So another question, what were we doing wrong here? On these years leading up to this, it looked great. From this vantage point, that line went straight up. What were we doing wrong?
You were doing it right. You were learning and applying and kept focusing.
Right. But then we had that big dip.
Okay, then you didn't realize the change in the fundamental structure and didn't want to believe that and adapt.
Very good. We weren't planning for the future. We didn't have follow-on products. And so one of the things we learned after that is from that point forward, we said, that's never going to happen to us again. So we developed a little department in our company we called Resource Labs. Kind of like Bell Labs kind of thing, but it was really basically me and 2 other people. But the whole purpose of Resource Labs is to constantly be looking for products, ideas that we would sell in 2 or 3 years, looking at the future. So with that, I'm going to stop quizzing you, and Greg's going to give a few remarks about innovation and entrepreneurship. Want me to hit the lights too?
No, it's okay.
You sure?
If you hit the screen, maybe.
Yeah.
So as you can tell from the timeline that Larry just painted, we had to be pretty good innovators and pretty good creative folks to manage our way through all those inflection points. So not only did we imagine how we could be focused in our energy, we also try to essentially, as a byproduct of surviving through all of that, had a pretty good engine that raised our capacity to be innovative and creative to figure out where we were going to buy the next jar of peanut butter. So let's, I'm kind of coining it entrepreneurial innovation, but it's the capacity to recognize and encourage the organization to reach innovative entrepreneurial thinking in all elements of the operation. So Larry talked about lots of our products, but we also, as an organization, prided ourselves in being innovative and creative across all factors that required us to deliver products into long-term care. So we were creative about how we installed our product, how we taught people how to use our product, really creative about how to market and sell our product. We tried to be creative throughout the organization. And part of the discussion then today is to imagine what kinds of things Muskingum did to help us have a character that could help us manage through those cycles that Larry just talked about. So thinking about it a little bit, taking a step back, curiosity, desire, and perseverance are kind of core themes at a 10,000 foot level that drove us to have that capacity. In fact, my daughter Chelsea is here, and wife Eileen here of 34 years, almost 34, and daughter Claire here. But Chelsea one time gave me a present that she made that was some art that was a picture of the Wright brothers biplane, one of their first biplanes, and the header to it was perseverance. Because she knew, and as we kind of all do, in order for the Wright brothers to do what they did, and it's kind of there's an interesting book about the Wright brothers that's out that talks about what their background was like. It was kind of a liberal arts background that gave them the capacity to invent aviation like they did. But Chelsea gave me a picture of one of their biplanes, and the header of it was Perseverance. So Perseverance is kind of the thing on top of curiosity and desire that led us through those peaks and valleys that Larry talked about. So we did have some unsuccessful inventions. This is one of Larry's ideas. We talked about garbage haulers and some other building stuff. We had some other inventions. Here's another one. Larry likes tools. This is a Swiss Army knife gone steroid. And another one. Water's a problem in us, so he thought we could capture. Here's another one. He had trouble finding someone to produce this. I still think it was a good idea. Ultimately, the ultimate golfer's dream, the capacity to store your cigar on a golf ball on the golf course. So, we had a number of no-go starters that Larry didn't talk about. We had a few that did, though. Part of that is tied again to the Muskingum experience, which I'm kind of proud to talk about a little bit. And I don't know if anyone recognizes this.
Italy.
That's right. It's the El Duomo in Florence, Italy. I was part of one of those January interims where Louis Palmer took a bunch of muskies over there and learned a lot about art and physics and architecture and history. Laura Lee Porter even joined us one time, so we learned a lot about a little sprinkling of medieval history. But this is kind of the centerpiece of Florence, and you can see this dome from all around Florence. And if you ever get lost, you can always reorient yourself relative to where the dome is. But it was a design made by an architect by the name of Brunelleschi. And interestingly, Brunelleschi was a goldsmith. He was a goldsmith architect, but trained himself in drawing and physics. In fact, a lot of people don't know he was the earliest inventor of an alarm clock. This guy came up with it, but he wasn't an alarm clock guy. He wasn't even an architect, but he won the contest to figure out how to put this dome on top of a church that was already there and do it without the walls collapsing under the weight of the dome, which at the time, in the early Renaissance, is a pretty interesting feat. So hold that thought for a second. Everybody probably recognizes this Leonardo da Vinci. He's a guy that was interested in art, science, math, physics, probably, arguably, maybe one of the best artists of all time, Leonardo da Vinci. Hold that thought for a second. Now, this one doesn't seem like it kind of fits. But this is a termite anthill in Africa. When somebody figured out how these termite hills work, in fact, one of the magic things about them is if you took the temperature inside of this termite hill, even in Zimbabwe, Africa, where it gets really hot during the day, the temperature inside that termite anthill remains relatively the same. So the interesting thing about this is that somebody thought, in the same country in Zimbabwe, we have to figure out how to put an energy efficient building together with not a bunch of electricity, which is a pretty rare commodity in Zimbabwe. How can we keep this office building cool? And so they essentially used design theories that draws air from the outside, takes it down, and then exits it out the top. Used those design theories in the building of one of the highest, which is only like 8 stories in Zimbabwe, one of their highest buildings. They used design theory mimicking what termites did in Africa here. So, kind of interesting. The theme here is intersections. Intersections. And I think it's one of the key things that Larry and I really enjoyed the benefit while we were here at Muskingum. As Larry, I was a math major at Muskingum. Larry was a communications major. We both really had a blast with computers. We did, and that was the early stage, so there wasn't even a computer science major at the time, but we had a blast playing with computers. Larry played the French horn. He was a pole vaulter. I was involved with the Black and Magenta on theater. In fact, met one of the earliest interactions with wife Eileen was in The Odd Couple, where I was Felix and she was one of the Pigeon Sisters. Funny how that turned out. But we both experienced the full range of what Muskingum could help us with. And that led to some interesting intersections. And that kind of, so that grounds the curiosity and the desire components. Curiosity about how things work, a variety of different things work. A desire to help people was also a part of a desire to understand how we could use some of this curiosity to translate it to systems, things that help people. And the last one then is perseverance that we were talking about before. Losing, if at first you don't succeed, failure may be your style. Now that's kind of an interesting thing to say, but as you can imagine, that line went pretty long in the 80s that Larry showed. We had to be ready to gird up our loins and bump right through garbage haulers if that wasn't it, payroll systems if that wasn't it, medical billing systems if that wasn't it. We had to deal with landing on the floor and picking ourselves up to understand the next place we would go. And so what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? Was kind of a question that we asked. And I don't know, has anyone heard the term burning the boats on the shore? Burning the boats on the shore. I mean, Larry and I did this right out of college, so essentially we didn't know any better. We didn't even know that you could eat things other than peanut butter and jelly. There were other things out there that we could eat. But essentially, we were all in. There was no really very good way to exit from where we were. We burned the boats on shore. So we imagined a lot what we could do if we couldn't fail. I mean, the consequences couldn't be too much worse than peanut butter and jelly. So here's something interesting. Whatever humans have learned had to be learned as a consequence only of trial and error experience. Humans have learned only through mistakes. Buckminster Fuller. So we had to apply perseverance in a lot of cases and figure out how to deal essentially with failing. It's kind of interesting if you look at how modern bridges are built. The suspension bridge, the guy who really came up with the design for building suspension bridges, he didn't get his ideas from the latest and greatest ways that people were building bridges. He got his most constructive ideas from studying bridge failures. He focused on the things of his time that caused bridge failures. And that's what gave him the jump of creativity to say, hey, what would happen if we used a suspension bridge? Another example is the Titanic, which we all know how that turned out. But the creative shipbuilding that came out of understanding the failures that occurred because of that were momentous. So great learning from failures. From Larry's timeline, you can see that we had to become pretty good at managing it. So curiosity, desire, perseverance. And as Larry indicated, one of our big early inventions was using barcodes. A good example of intersections, because the technology that we used for this back in the 80s, and it's hard to imagine this, but back then barcoding was not pervasive in retail operations, and it was just down at Chagog's IGA, they were just putting scanners in or even having product on the shelves that had barcodes in it. So one of the creative intersections that we did, we stole from those data wands that Larry was talking about, which was typically used not in the healthcare industry, it was used in the retail industry to take inventory in shopping areas and in grocery stores and retail operations. and we merged it with the capacity to print these barcodes on a dot matrix printer. A dot matrix printer, if you can remember, and the sound of it is something you don't forget. But we figured out a way to use these readers that were used in retail and use some kind of creative software to print barcodes, merge them together and use barcodes, a barcode for a resident, a barcode for a product, because most of the products didn't even have barcodes on them at the time, and put together a system that helped track items. So that was an example of an intersection. This is another example of the intersection, and Larry described this application that we came up with roughly in 2000 that helped track the care that was delivered to residents in long-term care facilities. And the exciting part about this is that care plans were previously developed in long-term care based on, as we found out, inaccurate information. So in other words, skilled healthcare professionals, nursing folks and doctors couldn't make good assessments about what a care plan should be until they had good data to do it. So that was the problem. We used engineering, or borrowed or stole, once again, from the hospitality business, this idea that we would use a device to collect enormous amounts of data about residents so that we could paint a better picture about the acuity of care needed in a long-term care facility. We use these touch screens. There's really not too much magic. Again, it's an intersection we borrowed from what they're doing a lot of in the hospitality industry, using these same things in a restaurant to record how many hamburgers you want. There isn't too much magic about it, except we changed the pictures, designed a really friendly way to use it, hung it on the wall, and started gathering information about what nursing folks, nurses' aides, and other folks in long-term care observed about residents in long-term care facilities. So again, an interesting example about intersections. So we asked ourselves, how can we reward our innovative thinking within our team? So for us to survive through those periods that Larry talked about, we had to be good at innovation, and it couldn't be just Larry and me. We worked about trying to help our organization throughout be innovative and creative, not be afraid of failure, be ready to take risks, to feel like you could advance ideas that were off the wall. We tried to instill that throughout the organization. How can we set up an environment that encourages creative thinking? One thing that we did, we had an annual innovation award. So the staff member or groups or couples of staff members that had creative ideas, and no matter what their discipline could be, it might be in accounting, it might be in customer care, we would recognize those staff members monthly and yearly in an award. How can we set up the idea of continuous ongoing thinking? And as Larry indicated, as times change, we had to be able to survive the next loop. We had to continuously do it. If we waited until we recognized the time to do it, we would be behind that curve. So we had to get good at it, and we had to continuously do it. So, in conclusion, curiosity, desire, perseverance, those three things created some really exciting intersections for Larry and I. I think Muskingum was an ideal place to set the groundwork, establish a framework that allowed us to think at those creative levels. So with that, Larry?
All right, I'm going to add a few comments about curiosity and desire and perseverance. One thing, while we were in those early lean peanut butter and jelly years, one of the things we did is to get some additional money just to keep us alive is, back then the arcade games were just becoming popular. The Space Invaders time was just happening about then. And so we bought a Space Invaders machine, great big arcade, and we put it in the local laundromat, which was about 3 or 4 doors down from where my apartment was. And there were some kids in town who were really addicted to that, and we liked that. And we went down there every week, and we would get about $400 of quarters out of there. And so that kept us alive for a couple more years while the kids were playing Space Invaders. And one day, we brought it back to my apartment, because it needed some maintenance, or I can't quite remember why it was there, but my apartment was right on Main Street, and there was a window that you could see it in there. And I'd never locked my doors here in New Concord. And one night, I was sleeping along, it was in my bedroom, and I was sleeping along, and I heard the toom, 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 and it was one of the kids from town playing the Space Invaders game. And everybody said, well, did you kick him out? And I said, no, he gave us a quarter for it. So, a couple things. Oh, you didn't know that, did you, Matt? Okay, so a couple things that I think are really important about connecting with Muskingum and the liberal arts education. Greg mentioned curiosity. And when we were at this point, right about here, right there, things were very, very bleak. And we were at the point where we were worn out and we were tired and we had no prospects, no leads. I had gone to a trade show and him come back with no leads, and it really was a sad time. So Greg and I talked, and we kind of had a heart-to-heart discussion and said, well, maybe it's time to explore alternative options, which meant go out and get a real job. And so the next day we went out on the golf course, and we were, at that time, that nursing home had talked to us about the barcoding, or about the inventory thing, and we had looked at that little barcode reader, but it had no screen on it. And so we couldn't imagine how a person could actually use that without being prompted to know what to do next. So we were talking about it in the first couple holes, and then we stopped talking about it, and then on the 10th hole, and I remember it very vividly, Greg hit his drive, and then I hit my drive, and after I went over to the weeds and picked it up and got over to the fairway where Greg was, he was there, and he goes, why not? I said, why not what? Because he says, why not just do it without the prompting? Why would it actually happen? And he asked the question why, which was a curiosity question. And we thought about it, and we took the concept to that nursing home, and you know the story of what that light bulb, that questioning why, that curiosity that Greg had. Greg is known for that curiosity, and I watched him as he went through Muskingum, and from that point forward has always been very, very curious. And curiosity is the fuel, it's the gasoline, it's the ammunition for creativity. So a liberal arts education, if it can create the curiosity, which that's what liberal arts does, we don't need more technology, deeper technology people in this world. There's plenty of countries with deep, deep technology, and we as a country try competing head to head with technology people. That's not where it's at. There was the information age, or the industrial age, then the information age, and the next age is the creative age. And the winning currency for the creative age is curiosity. So we have a great opportunity as liberal arts proponents. Liberal arts educations are going to be the greatest asset for the future for our country. So that's the curiosity side. There's another side, and Greg talked about the desire and perseverance, which are elements of character. And back in Ronald Reagan's administration, there was a new manager that came on board, and he was all excited, and he got in, and he was unloading his things into his office. We had his office almost all set up, and he wanted to kind of look like a bigwig, and he saw a guy approaching his office, so he picked up his phone, and he said, "Yes, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President. Yes, I'll take care of it right away." And he hung up the phone, and the guy was at the door, and he said, "May I help you?" And the guy said, "Yeah, my name's Bob. I'm here to connect your phone." So we tend to think that titles are important. We tend to think that the higher up in the organization you are, the greater asset you are. But that's not true. Organizations, and research shows this, organizations that have leaders throughout the organization are the winning organizations. We had a woman, a young woman, that started with our company as an intern from Muskingum. Her name was Cindy, in 1987-ish, somewhere like that. So she was probably about the 6th or 7th employee. Started as an intern, and she was my assistant. And the first week she was there, I could tell right away that she was one of the best listeners that I had ever met. When we would explain something to her, she absorbed it and she understood it. And she would ask questions, but you could tell she was understanding it. If it was an assignment, 2 days later, she had the assignment done, and she would be proactively solving problems along the way. And she was very, very successful at that. And so after about 6 months, there was another team that was having some difficulties, so we moved Cindy over to this other team, and she performed that same way. She would listen and learn, and that team became very successful. And this repeated pattern took place for the next 20 years, and she, by the time we sold the company, she had been part of and led almost every team in the organization. And everybody loved Cindy because they wanted her to be on their team, because wherever she was listening, she was performing, and she had the character that was so valuable. Cindy wasn't the only person from Muskingum. We had about 100 employees, and about a third of them came from Muskingum. And you could tell there was a clear difference between the character of those people from Muskingum. There were people like Cindy throughout the organization, and they were the leaders, and they were everywhere in the organization, and that's what made the organization successful. I wish Greg and I could take credit for it, but it truly was the leaders throughout the organization. And that's what we need. We need more liberal arts type of educations where the character is the most important part. I don't even know what Cindy's major was. To this day, I don't even know what her major, but Greg and I think her major was character. And when she was here, and when you were here, and when Greg and I were here, without even knowing it, we were shaped by people like, and you can start naming them, Sam Speck, Jim Burson, Art DeYoung, David Skeen, Herb Thompson, Steve Kokovich, Ralph Hollingsworth, Mrs. Montgomery, Dr. McClellan, Louis Palmer, Laura Lee Porter. Those are some that kind of were in our generation. But the continuity, that type of character is here, and it will always be here. Greg and I are convinced that our companies, our economy, and our country will prosper more by building a character like Muskingum does and like liberal arts education programs do, infinitely more than highly technical universities out there. So we'd like to thank all of you for attending. Thank you for staying awake. And we're open to any kind of questions you might have. And Greg will answer them.
Well, that point at the PPS,
Yes.
there was an article in an Entrepreneur magazine one time that I got. It was called Change or Die.
Yes.
And you got to that point. You had to change or die.
Yes.
But you also, one of the things that they said was people that could catch a vision and communicate that vision. It sounded like that Cindy was that kind of person.
Yeah.
That she could listen and say, hey, here's how it fits in, here's where we're going.
Yes.
And
Yes.
also the rewarding of it, because it's something when we try to change behavior, if you're gonna fall.
Right.
And if you don't have something that is supportive of getting back into the game kind of thing, you lose it. And what you're saying is that's a very key element.
I think you're making a really good point. Behaviors are really hard to change, and that's why when we were hiring people, we hired first for character. And people could learn the skills needed, but character was the first thing. That's why Muskingum was such a great place to hire from.
And I think another thing that came out, they said one of the things that's really important is the ability of attitude of your corporate people. Their identification with it, they're willing to, you know, participate, because that attitude makes a difference.
Yes.
And what that comes from character.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very good point. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you're interviewing someone with the idea of character in mind and they did not have the Muskingum background, how do you evaluate that?
It was a little tricky, and I know we've talked about that many times. Great, it's a really good point, because it's such a subtlety.
It's very hard to measure.
It's hard to measure. There were some attributes, and oftentimes digging into what they've done in the past. One of the things we always looked at from any school, but especially Muskingum, we look at what kind of extracurriculars were they in, because that oftentimes told us.
What do you do for fun? What do you
Yeah.
read? Even those seem like obtuse questions,
Right.
they lead a little bit into a
They give you
little deeper.
insight.
Yeah. Very good point.
It's a great story. Have you written a book? Or at least write
There's
memoirs or
there's
something?
actually some talk about that, yeah. We actually, Debbie was an editor for a newspaper and has gotten some things started, but we haven't finished it yet.
You should.
We've been involved in other things. Yes.
Parents today want their kids to be successful, which they define as get a job and make money. And you look at statistics that say liberal arts education, and let's pick like English and psychology and history, etc. Those majors make about yay much money, whereas if they get into computer science or engineering, they make much more. So the parents want their kids to go into a technical field instead of the liberal arts field. How do you convince them? No. You need to be the English major or the psychology major or whatever, and not the petroleum geology major.
I would convince them there's another stratosphere above that, where entrepreneurs live and leaders live, above the technicians. That's what I-
It is a hard sell, though, because
Yeah, it's a hard sell.
in the short run, you could avoid the peanut butter and jelly effect.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, the line would stay a little more flat. It wouldn't have the slope if another approach. So it's sort of a challenge of delayed impact. But it also suggests that there wouldn't necessarily be it's not unreasonable to expect that a postgraduate experience that might be a little more vocational or technical would be layered on top of this foundation, would be the other approach.
Yeah.
So some of that technical expertise, but still the end result would be that you would have a line with a slope more than a line with probably less of a slope over the long haul. The interesting thing is for Jeff and folks in admissions is how you make that sell.
Yeah.
Maybe part of the trick is you put a covering on it that makes it feel like one thing, but you're really getting something else, and that is the foundation. I mean, it's interesting, President Steve was just mentioning how many times that vocational thing may attract somebody, but how many times people change their mind before they're out would lend credence to there may be some other factors beyond the short-term factor that would maybe influence that. But if you give in to that urge, you can see why, at least from a cultural perspective, you may have a train wreck downstream with someone who's been educated in a narrow field that makes it difficult to transcend to a field that may be their deeper calling, or maybe that may use their capacities more richly than they even maybe know that they have. So I don't envy folks in higher ed trying to navigate that one.
It's a good question, John.
Oh, well, I'm thinking perhaps like you did, maybe you need to look at the opportunities that come as things change, like, you know, in English. Maybe the way it used to be is no longer the way it is now. I know I was an art major, and I looked at what could I do, you know, I became an art teacher. I mean, you look at where there's money. I'm not just going to be a starving artist. I mean, I know people have done that, and in the end, I was better off. So I think you have to look at, like you did, and my daughter did internships where they kind of had a month to test things out. And I think that's a good way for kids to find out. They like it, they don't like it. A month is not that long a period of time. So I think, you know, that's something for us to look at.
Yeah.
Daughter Claire was also a major in art, but she was a volleyball player, and now she's consulting in higher ed to keep students engaged in their education.
Yeah, with computer, there's just a lot more opportunities that did used to happen. Yeah, you never know, too, it's going to change.
Yes.
I know the year I graduated, '86, I was a business ed double major. We had a seminar class our senior year where we adopted, or a business in Zanesville allowed us to examine their marketing strategies. We based it on marketing. And then we presented it, and Zach's had just opened in Zanesville.
Oh.
So we had this dinner with it was Midas Muffler in Zanesville. And we did a survey of his customers that came in, and did just a lot of data collection. And then there was a kind of a cross group of us. Some of us were business majors, some of us were accounting majors. And they brought us together to give them a scenario of what would make their business better, whether it was based on their accounting process or their marketing process. But there needed to be, I mean, they were just starting that here. I don't know if that still goes on.
Yeah.
But that was a wonderful experience for me.
That's
You know,
neat,
it
yeah.
really helped me with my
Yeah.
teaching, and then later I'm in business for myself now, investing. And so it's, yeah, that I can say was probably the most cross-curricular experience I had here, you know, other than my major.
That's good to hear. We're doing some work with some internship programs like that are kind of similar.
Okay.
One of the questions I ask the prospective interns is, how many of you want a job sometime after you graduate? And they all raise their hand. But then I say, how many of you want jobs in business? And they almost all put their hands down. And then I remind them, well, if you're getting a paycheck, you're in a business. Whatever it is, if it's making money enough to pay you, it's a business. And then they kind of turn a little bit and realize what the internships are all about. You had a question.
Yeah, hi. So actually, too, I wanted to add a little bit to your question. So I'm, like Regina, I'm an 86 grad too, and I majored in computer science and minored in math and economics. So you can mix up, and I'm kind of glad I did, that I didn't go into pure engineering, that I did liberal arts, but with a focus on computer science and mathematics. So you can kind of mix that up in liberal arts too. You can get a computer science degree, and then for your master's, if you want, you can go to an MBA or something. I think it served me well. I think it worked out, and I think it was an amazing experience. Now, I wanted to add, I'm sorry I missed the earlier part of your presentation. So, and this is a question about your company. Did you guys at any time seek any kind of outside funding, venture funding? No. Did that ever come into mind when you were at the arcade machine?
We were too dumb. It's funny because we now are kind of involved in some of the angel funds and the venture funds around the area, and it seems we sometimes ask ourselves, why didn't we ever think about this? But we're really glad we didn't, because it was so nice to completely bootstrap it, because you learn so many resourceful habits when you're using your own money and doing arcade machines and so forth.
Spending your own money.
Spending your own money.
It probably made the runway longer.
Yeah.
Right. But it also, on the other hand, allowed us to focus almost exclusively on doing things that would help customers.
Right, but there's also this angle, just in the same vein as you talk about liberal arts, that if you get the right investor, if you get the right angel investor, then you're also gaining from their experience, not just their money.
Right.
That's
Very
true.
good.
In fact,
That's a good point.
I mean, in fact, we were able to adopt a couple of Muskie grads on our advisory board, even though they didn't have direct equity in our company, that helped us navigate that and get the experience from an outside perspective without necessarily having the equity direct.
I think we're eating into your eating. So,
One of the things I noticed in your thing of getting your education, you had to become active, and you had to actually involve creative problem solving, like the painting those towers.
Yeah.
Like, hold it, $1.25 an hour, how can I move it up to this other thing? And so you were willing to try, and that set your mindset and also your perseverance. That character set that you learned in getting the foundation of your education is what has moved you through these other aspects.
yeah, great point. Yeah.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, thank you very much.